Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and this is my review of episode 9 of season 3 of Lower Decks, called Trusted Sources. And the episode begins with exactly what I was hoping for, to have an episode which is a sequel to an older episode from the previous shows, to go back to some planet which the Enterprise dealt with, in which the final outcome is unknown, in which we don't really know what happened next after the Enterprise left, because then we can see the results of the interference of Starfleet on that planet. And so in this episode they go back to that planet from the TNG episode Symbiosis, which in my opinion was one of the better episodes of season 1 of TNG, which was mostly a terrible season, but it did have a few good episodes. And I think Symbiosis is actually a good episode because the idea of it is really interesting. The idea that two planets are in a relationship in which one planet provides a drug to the other planet, and that's the only product they give them, and the other planet gives them everything else because they're so hooked on that one drug. And so it's basically an exploitation relationship that one planet takes advantage of the other one. They also showed us that the planet which creates the drug seems to be a rich planet and the other one seems to be poor. And it's a moral dilemma for Picard because when their cargo ships breaks down and at first he wants to help them repair them, I presume both of these planets have warp technology, by the way, and that's why Starfleet is allowed to talk with them and intervene with them to a degree, I guess. And so at first Picard is perfectly willing to help them fix their ships until he discovers the thing about the drug, and then decides to follow the Prime Directive to the letter and not intervene at all, not even help them fix their ships, and just leaves, because he knows that by doing that it will free the poor planet from the control of the rich planet which is giving them drugs, because they will not be able to deliver it, and so they will have the withdrawal symptoms and realize that they're not going to die, they're just hooked on it. And for some reason he couldn't tell that planet about all of it. He had to pretend to be the bad guy and just not help them, when in reality he was helping them without their knowledge. And I guess he also did it to protect the richer planet, because by giving them more time to prepare, it will prevent a humanitarian disaster on that planet, because if all ties were severed immediately, that will cause them to starve because they cannot produce anything on their own except that drug. And so Picard basically gives them time to prepare for that, because they will know that it will happen, and so they will have time to prepare, and it might prevent a humanitarian disaster on the so-called bad planet. So by keeping quiet and simply leaving the situation, knowing that their ships will break down in the next cycle, it will fix the situation without violating the Prime Directive, without intervening directly, and so he just leaves. And apparently in this episode, when they revisit this planet, it worked perfectly, and that planet was freed from their addiction and instead became addicted to fitness and a healthy lifestyle, which is a good thing. And they have that funny painting of when they were begging to the Enterprise to help them, and then they became crazy from the lack of drugs, and then they were cured from it, and then they became all fit and perfectly healthy. So that was kind of funny, and it's funny how they cannot believe that there is no problem on the planet, because, always in Starfleet, whenever you visit some planet, there's always some kind of problem, otherwise there's no story. And here they're surprised that Picard did the right thing, and everything is perfectly okay on this planet, and they don't need their help anymore. And then they decide to go and visit the other planet, the Pusher planet. And when they go there, they see that everything seems to be abandoned. There are no people on the streets. Maybe they all ate each other because they no longer had any food after it was cut off from the planet that they were exploiting. So I was really curious to see where they're going with it. And then suddenly the Breen from Deep Space Nine show up and start shooting everyone. And apparently they conquer the planet. And that's why it was the way it was. And I love the Breen from Deep Space Nine, and I enjoyed seeing them here visually. I like that. But it has absolutely nothing to do with the story about those two planets, and so it's just so random, it's totally unconnected. There is no explanation for why they came to conquer this specific planet and not the other one. What are they doing here? Maybe they'll explain all of this in the next episode, or maybe not. Maybe it's simply another member berry which was pushed together with another member berry, and it completely stopped what could have been an interesting story continuation, a sequel to the Symbiosis episode from TNG, to see the results of whatever Picard did. Maybe what he did benefited the junkie planet, but it destroyed the drug dealing planet. And so that could have been interesting to see, like at least a few moments of that. But no, it just went completely into something else about the Breen conquering the planet, and that's why it was the way it was. I guess maybe they did it because that planet deserved to be conquered, because they were the bad guys of that story, I guess. But it doesn't really advance that story, which could have been interesting. And so that's why I don't really like it. I feel as if it's a cop-out, it's a missed opportunity. It's just two member berries mashed together without any real connection to it. Why did the Breen want this specific planet? Unless they explain it later, maybe by saying that the Breen wanted those plants from which they were making the drugs, maybe they needed it for themselves for some reason, and so if they explain it somehow, fine, but it was not explained, and it just seemed totally random. So the Breen show up, and there are some action scenes which are great. We see the Breen ship suddenly appearing and attacking the Cerritos, and they apparently still use that energy draining weapon which they used in one of the final episodes of Deep Space Nine when suddenly they had that super weapon, but Starfleet found a way to withstand it, and so why is it still working unless I guess they modified it. So visually it looks exactly like in Deep Space Nine, the way their ships look and behave and the way they shoot. And there's a cool scene in which they try to board the Cerritos, and everything visually is great. I love it visually, but story-wise, it's totally random and makes no sense, unless maybe they'll explain it in the next episode. I hope so. At least explain why the Breen wanted to conquer that planet. Was it to get that plant from which they were making the drug? Or maybe it's because of the unusual properties of the star in that system, which apparently turns people into mutants, because in that TNG episode Symbiosis, the people on both planets also had those energy powers. They were fighting each other with some yellow energy, which I guess came from that star which was unstable, and so maybe that's what the Breen were after. Maybe they wanted to do genetic studies on the effects of that planet. So some kind of explanation about why they wanted that specific planet would have been appreciated, would have been interesting, but there was none. And so to me it seemed like a total cop-out, just cutting off that other storyline and going in a completely different direction. And I enjoyed seeing them visually, but without any story, it's kind of meaningless. Also, there was a line by Shax who said that the Breen don't take prisoners, which doesn't seem accurate because I seem to remember that they took Ezri Dax and Worf prisoners, and we also saw the Breen using slave labor in season 4 of Deep Space Nine when we saw a prison camp which they were guarding. So obviously the Breen do take prisoners. So Shax saying that they don't is a continuity mistake, or maybe he just doesn't know and just says that to motivate his men. But still, I feel as if it's a lack of attention to detail this time. And also, how come the Breen even have weapons? Like, didn't they surrender in the end of the Dominion War? We saw them in the same room with the Dominion when they were signing the surrender treaty to the Federation. So how come the Federation didn't make sure that the Breen disarm and will stop attacking other planets? And so if they develop it somehow, if they explain all of this, I'm fine with it. But if it's just thrown in as a member berry, then in this case it's annoying. I love the member berry itself, but it has to be connected with a story which makes sense. So tying that with the planet from Symbiosis seems kind of strange, and it completely stopped that story, which could have been interesting about continuing that story from TNG to see what happened with that other planet as a result of Picard's actions. And yet they never really explain anything. We don't know what happened on that planet after that. We just know that it was conquered by the Breen. Now, if the Breen become the next villains in this show and they explain that maybe they needed that drug because maybe they are dying from some disease or something, so maybe they can finally unmask them and show us how they really look like. Maybe they can show us their home planet. All of that stuff can be interesting, even though, as I said earlier, some mysteries are better left as mysteries because by unveiling them it might ruin it. So I don't know. I guess we'll wait and see. And the other plot in this episode is that while all of this is going on, there was a reporter from the Federation News Network on the ship interviewing the crew and going with them on the mission and all of that. And Starfleet approved this because they wanted to prove that the Cerritos class ships are really important because of the swing by missions and something. And so that reporter is going around the ship interviewing everyone, and at some point Mariner really wants to get interviewed, and the captain is worried that she'll give a bad impression, so she tries to avoid it, and yet Mariner somehow sneaks around and gets interviewed. And right after that, the journalist publishes a horrible story about the Cerritos, how it's so terrible and all of that, and everyone assumes that it's Mariner who told her all those stories because she's always the one causing trouble. And so the captain is pissed off and reassigns her to Starbase 80, the worst possible starbase in all of Starfleet, and they show us a few guys from that station and they seem really kind of lazy and stupid and all of that, so they send her to the worst possible starbase and she doesn't understand why, and everyone on the ship are angry at her, thinking she's the one who caused the bad story about the ship. And of course the twist in the end is that it wasn't actually her, that she actually only said good things and it was everyone else who were saying all kinds of little stories about what was really going on, the same stuff that we saw watching the show. And so everyone else told all the other stories about the ship being incompetent and all of that, and she's actually the only one who said good things, but everyone assumed it must be her, and it kind of makes sense because she's the one always causing trouble for everyone. So it's still kind of her fault that everyone thought that, because that's how she was behaving all the time. So it makes sense that everyone will blame her even when she's not guilty. So it's still kind of her fault because that's how everyone knows her as. And so they sent her off. And after all of that, they go to the other planet, and the ship is attacked by the Breen. And then is saved by another Starfleet ship, which is apparently totally automatic. It's the new Texas class, which is completely run by computers, and the reporter sees that and is impressed by that, and it kind of makes me suspect maybe the Admiral somehow orchestrated all of this simply to promote that other class of ships for some reason. I guess we might see that in the next episode, and this episode ends with Mariner together with that archaeologist lady that we saw in the previous episode, so she invited her to join her back then, so I guess it was all a setup for this, because now Mariner left Starfleet and they went to join the archaeology team, I guess. Maybe we'll get to see Vash in the next episode. Maybe she'll be revealed to be the leader of the space archaeologist or something. So it might be interesting, it might be fun. So I think the next episode is the season final. So maybe they'll do something epic, I hope so. Maybe they'll explain what the Breen were looking for on that planet. Maybe we'll see what happened before that. How did that society survive what Picard did? That was the biggest missed opportunity of this episode, because they seemed to be setting it up, and then it was a complete cop-out by suddenly going into a totally different direction. It was nice to see the Brain, but I wish it would have been in a completely separate episode and not tied with that specific story, which could have been its own interesting story, which they didn't fulfill, unfortunately. So that kind of brings the episode down, in my opinion. I would say it's a below average episode. And the stuff with the reporter was also kind of annoying. It's the same thing I complained about in Star Trek Picard when they showed that reporter from FNN, which was really annoying and tried to catch Picard saying something bad and was happy when he did. And so it's like the same behavior as the journalist of today, always looking for ratings, not caring about the truth or about accuracy and fairness and all of that. And so why would that be the attitude in the far future in which they have no money? So reporters shouldn't really care that much about their ratings. I guess they still care about their reputation, but shouldn't their reputation mean honesty and accuracy and all of that more than just clickbait titles and just making people look bad for their ratings like the reporters of today often do and all of that? So that really kind of annoys me, because that's not the attitude of the Federation that we saw in the old shows, which was all about an utopia, about an evolved humanity, people who don't lie, don't cheat anymore and all of that. And then we see that actually it's exactly like today. So that always kind of annoys me a little bit, because I feel it goes against the vision of Gene Roddenberry about a better humanity. So they started doing that kind of stuff with the new Star Trek shows, like in Star Trek Picard and Discovery. And Lower Decks was mostly kind of keeping it more like the older shows, with some references to the new shows as well, but not allowing it to take over. And a lot of this episode was about that reporter, which I guess is a parody and a poke about the journalism of today, but it's not an alien journalist, it's a human journalist, and humanity is supposed to be evolved and better than that in this time frame, so it shouldn't be like today. So that's my point. So all of this together makes this a below average episode. I would say it's a 3 out of 10 in my opinion. Let me know what you think, and we can discuss all of this in the comments below, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.